The whole world daily is watching live stream genocide. The most unfortunate thing at this point in time is that Muslims are, in their colonial mentality, they won't stand up to the occasion. Somebody burns a Qur'an or says something or doesn't say something and they say blasphemy, and the whole Punjab, is lit on fire. And a whole community of our Muslim brothers and sisters are being blown to smithereens, and we have nothing. We can't even sacrifice not eating KFC and stop drinking Coca-Cola, Nahi bhai, to kya hoga? Again, that goes back to the Gulami mentality. Yeah. West is right. West is great. What's so great about coming from America? Oh, America. We think you guys are great. You're Muslim, Pakistan. Wow, America. What the kuffar? And the whole concept, white. The whitening cream, the men are the bigger consumers than the women. This guy's roaming around the street picking up garbage and old used. And if you ask the guy, bhai kya haal hai? Allah ka bar shukr hai, but Allah ka bar I go to defense and Goldberg, Saab kya haal hai? Kya hai, main kya bata sakta hu? Muslim Messiah, no way. And then from Yemen, I went on the boat to Hajj with my guitar. But my father, he was only really angry with me on one point. You cannot say anything that the government doesn't want you to say, otherwise tomorrow you're ghaib. A pretty controversial thing to say here, but I'll say it anyway because I know you have a controversial audience.
If we look at our data, 57% of people on our channel have not subscribed. यानी अगर आप नसीहा इंस्टीट्यूट के काम को पसंद करते हैं, सुनते हैं, तो मेरी रिक्वेस्ट ये है कि please subscribe. Now we don't monetize our work, but what it does is it helps the algorithm grow. यानी the more the subscribers, the more widely will the message be spread. So if your subscription leads to more people hearing good content, ये आपका सदका जारिया है. And here's the good part. Subscribing is absolutely free.
There was always this notion of where, you would look at the West and you could see that they had this openness towards freedom of speech. And I don't know, at least like post, Gaza, I just feel like
no, it's become fascism. It's become a fascist
state. It wasn't like that before.
No,
because someone like Noam Chomsky, I don't think he would survive in these times. How open he was, how vocal he was.
Yeah. Well, he barely survived, as it were.
Yeah, sure.
He had a lot of enemies, But what's happened now is, it's always been the deep state kind of a thing, and the who runs the show has always been kind of a murky world, which the counterculture people like ourselves, we were always focused on these things, And most of the public, watch the 6 o'clock news, drink your 6-pack and chill, and okay, so what? But now, particularly because of social media, there's so many factors, but now, the awareness of and polarization has become much more intense. So we're seeing actually as Ibn Khaldun says, the revolution, the cyclic nature of history. So it's a repeat of circumstances. Now what we're seeing 7 October is basically the same scenario we saw in the 60s. Vietnam, sure. Civil rights.
Yeah.
But this is on steroids. Internet, social media, genocide, live stream.
Yeah.
We weren't getting live stream, Vietnam. We were just hearing about it. Every now and again you'd get some kind of, photographic images, or there might be, but it was just like, you would hear what's going on, and that was sufficient to get people to motivate. Now, the whole world daily is watching live stream genocide. This is, and the fact that you can have, Anthony Blinken standing up, well, we're just, our heart breaks for these poor Gazans, but we're going to defend Israel. We're going to supply Israel everything they want without any red lines. So the whole world, I mean, do you think people are so stupid? And what's so ironic about it is that you know that he knows that we know that you're telling outright lies. But so what? What are you going to do about it? Do something about it if you can. Catch me if you can, kind of thing. In Arabic we have this word, ghatrasa, which is hubris, of the highest and most blatant and most impugn nature. That's what we're seeing. And so it's shocking. And a lot of Americans are really shocked at what happened to us. Where's the freedom of speech? Where's the freedom of the, we have no representation anymore. Nobody in Congress is representing anybody in the public. And if anybody does, they're going to be pushed out. Yeah. You just saw, I don't know if you follow, but the few persons who had just said ceasefire, AIPAC came in, 10, 20, $30 billion spent, and they're out.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty intense situation, but of course, it's unsustainable. It's going to blow up, it's going to implode or explode, or probably both. But in the meantime, it's pretty tense. Very intense. Big test for Muslims. We're standing on the sidelines. It's too bad. Okay, what are you going to do? Nothing. Bechare, hum kya kar sakte? Kya kar sakte? For your dunya, kya kar sakte? Oh, mashallah, you're doing it. But, so it's unfortunately, this is a situation that we see. But nevertheless, Allah's doing what He intends to do. Jewish Voices for Peace, Code Pink, Not in Our Name, these Jewish organizations, they're on the front lines. You got this Jewish lady, she had set up tent at Tony Blinken's door for months. She was camped there every day with these signs and whatnot. And we Muslims say, what's the purpose? What, pagal hi kya? They understand, look, this is bad for everybody. It's bad for us too, because it's giving Jews a terrible name, And that's what Zionism feeds on. It feeds on anti-Semitism. Pachari lo, yani was. So whatever they do, it's chalo, yani. They had such a tough time. Doesn't matter. Let them do what they want to do, So, and as a result of that, and now the whole world sees what Israel is doing, so the common man will say, well, these are Jews. This is what every Jew is doing. This is what every Jew is about. On our campuses, the pro-Palestine, protests and sit-ins and encampments, half of them are Jews.
Yeah.
Vietnam was the same. All these, actually the Jewish people, I don't know, of course we don't know much about their history generally, but the Jewish people have a history of revolt. They're a revolutionary, they're a revolting kind of people. Either they're revolting against Allah or they're revolting against their oppressors or somebody. But, that's the history. And before the Holocaust, they had their own Hamas type of resistant movements, in Frankfurt, in Germany, and then in Vienna and different places, so in the Vietnam War, those protest civil rights movements, these young Jews, they were on the front line, so, and coming from, that's just coming from that, I come from that ancestry, I come from that heritage. So it's very saddening, that there so many Jewish people are so close, and in Aqidah, they're the closest people to us. Therefore, if you ask a rabbi, do the Muslims, worship the same God as you do? Yeah, they do. Yeah, they're monotheists. What about Christians? No. And therefore, most of the Jewish firaq, they consider offering prayers in a mosque is okay, but not in a church. Because Muslims are monotheists and Christians are polytheists. They're right. That's a long discussion. That's another area, that the history of Palestine, the history of the Jewish people, Muslims don't know about that. I want to actually educate Muslims on this. They need to know about Palestine, and they need to know this Zionist movement. What is that? Theodore Herzl. Well, who was he?
Yeah.
He wasn't a Jew. He was an atheist. I mean, Jewish
ancestry, but yeah.
An Orthodox Jew, if you ask him what is Judaism, following the Torah, that's Judaism. Kind of like what a Muslim believes. You believe in Allah is Rasul. If you don't believe in that, you're not a Jew. But the word itself comes from Yehuda. Yehuda was probably the fourth son of Yaqub alayhi salam. Some different opinion on when it was best. Anyway, he was one of the sons and he was one of the Bani Israel, of course, one of the original. And of course, the original, the kingdom of Israel, it was united, and then it became the kingdom of Israel, and the southern was called the kingdom of Judea, which is named after Judah. So Judaism, being a Yehud, on the one hand, it suggests ethnicity, but on the other hand, in terms of belief, it's a set of beliefs.
Yeah.
So the Zionists have nothing to do with the latter. They have
Everything to do with...
okay, we're from this ethnic background, which is also sometimes questionable.
So we just so Khair, I think it's more about sort of realizing over time that if we've not done much for it, like even now, like it's like I think we keep asking ourselves that with all the work of deen that is going on, and that just stands out, like not stands out, but like stays there like as the elephant in the room, where we know that we're collectively failing as an ummah, and it's really hard to sort of keep yourself motivated to keep doing what you're doing, knowing that issue is there. So we did do a recently, like we did and I think that was an eye opener for me. We did do a workshop recently on that. We had one of a really well-renowned historian come in and speak about this, and I think in about 3 hours he took us through like 100 years of Palestine. So, and I realized that like I didn't know like 80% of that.
Yeah, most of the people didn't.
Yeah.
That's why if 7th of October hadn't have happened, Palestine issue would have just dissipated into the horizon. It was already a dead issue.
Yeah.
And, Netanyahu came to the UN and said the Greater Israel, and nobody even questioned. There was no Palestine mentioned on the map that he drew for this is our, ultimate vision. There's no mention of Palestinian, and nobody raised an eyebrow. So, I mean, it was a dead issue. 6th of October. 7th of October, it's the hottest issue on the planet. SubhanAllah. The watershed moment. By the way, we have in the States, we have people like Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas MacArthur, big shots, previously in U.S., military. They said this was the most brilliant military, maneuver that we've seen in at least a century. These guys, it was impossible what they did.
Hamas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just stellar,
Yeah, the way I think someone from the audience asked the presenter as well during the session, right? Like what exactly happened on the 7th of October. And he was like, to put it very simply, they caught the Israeli army with their pants down, essentially. Like the operation and the sort of, the way that they went about it. And I think for me as well, I think just building off of
the tactical, the tactical precision that they carried that out with. And with what? Riding Chinese motorcycles and these, little, almost like toy guns. And these guys are supposed to be, the most AI equipped people on the planet.
Kind of pioneers.
The benchmark in supplying the world with all this security. And right on their board, they can't even, they just get, It just goes to show you, I come in fi'atin qalilan ghalabat fi'atan bi'idhnillah. So it was just it was a David and Goliath moment, kind of thing. And of course, they knew full well what the consequences are going to be. It's not like, we didn't see that coming. They knew exactly. If we're going to die, let's die with sharaf. Rather than dying this slow, humiliating death, let's die a death of rijal, Khalas, we're going to die anyways. Let's get it over with, with a fanfare, And they're doing it, subhanAllah. And then they were certain that, just slaughter these people and then they're going to all blame Hamas. And Hamas has never been more popular.
Yeah.
They're the one group that's standing up. Not only they're standing up to do something, they're doing it. They're kicking the behind of these guys.
Yeah,
have you seen the the videos that they show that they
it's insane. I was wondering this.
Barefoot with jeans, they go out there and blow up these tanks and these.
I was actually wondering, Sheikh, like that, because they're using so many, rocket launchers, etc. And I was thinking that where do they practice that? It takes. I'm sure it took some training,
they
right?
Grew up like that.
It's
they
insane.
Grew up in this.
Yeah. Like considering that Gaza is perhaps probably the most surveillance. It's the most surveyed.
Oh yeah.
So piece of land.
But this didn't start yesterday. They've been doing this for decades. They've been into this for decades. That tunnel system is just nobody knows to what extent they've developed that, and obviously they've got arms manufacturing going on. Because they just keep on coming on with it. They their supplies should have been done long ago. And they keep getting more advanced and more stuff, and so subhanAllah. I mean,
in fact, I would want your take on that. That there's one thing that where the Mujahideen, they're prepared, right? But it's just like it still stuns me how prepared the civilians were for this as well.
Because they've been in a prison for the past 17 years or however long it's been. So. And the Palestinians as a people, they're the most resilient people that I've ever seen after Pakistanis, I think.
Really?
Yeah. Pakistanis are extremely resilient people. But Palestinians, they're almost unhuman. They can withstand all they've been, this is not, as that historian would have explained to you, this has been going on for almost 100 years.
Yep.
Before 48, since the 30s, you had these militias coming in and slaughtering, the Palestinians. I mean, this has been going on since forever, And they've been under this occupation ever since, And and any other kind of people would have just, left. They said, no, this is our land. We're going to live here. We're going to die here. We're going to defend it. We're not leaving here. Doesn't matter. When they blow us all up. And there's an interesting thing, Dr. Tariq Suwaidan, you heard of him?
I've heard the name. Heard the name, yeah.
Wonderful, this guy. He has a whole leadership model. He's a wonderful guy from Kuwait. He says, he gives a wonderful example of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. When Musa alayhi salam, just the Red Sea opens up and Bani Israel goes through, and in a moment they're saved and Pharaoh is, destroyed. No sooner they get on the other side, they see some people worshiping, some idols. Ya Musa jallana ilan kamalahum aliyah. Come on, they got idols. Ya Musa, come on, let's have some idols. We just went through all of that, in Egypt, and we go through that, and then you're gonna, go into polytheism. Come on. So the point is, you see, they had been colonialized. This is the biggest problem here in Pakistan, India, the whole Indian subcontinent. The greatest job of colonialization, I think, that was ever done was the British in the subcontinent. They did a magnificent job. Maulana Ilyas was told, during the jihad, when Maulana Madani and all these, they to get, jihad against the British and get them out of India, which of course is a wajib shari. He said, yeah, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the love of the English out of the hearts. We might get them out. The laws of England are still here.
Yeah.
1870 law, whatever nonsense, it's still there.
Yeah.
Right? So Same. So this being colonialized. So what Fir'aun did, huh? يعني يستضعفون يستعبدون يستضعفون يعني subjugate them. Colonialization, that's what it is. Turn these people into your slaves. Turn their mentality into a slave mentality. Malcolm used to talk about it. In Afro-American history, you had the house slave, and then you had the field slave.
Mm-hmm.
The house slave, he was sir. He was really colonialized. He was obedient to his master. The field slave, he was the one that might get up and revolt. He might run away. He might even try and kill his master and what have you. So this is what we have. So Bani Israel had been under this colonialization, this slavery under Pharaoh. So it's colonial. So they were like, let's do what the people are doing. They're worshiping idols. Okay, let's do like them. What are they doing in America? What are they doing in Harvard with Yale? What are they doing in New York and LA? Let's do that. That's great. Wow. Mm-hmm. We used to come here in Jamaat, Americans, when we were, decades ago. And we'd come in, this is the Jamaat from America. Oh, wow, from America. We used to get furious. What's so great about coming from America? Yeah. Oh, America. We think you guys are great. You're Muslim, Pakistan. Wow, America. What the bullies of the world? They're kuffar. Yeah. So this gulami mentality, this is one of the biggest problems here. It's still here, very much so. It's taken all, So Musa alayhi salam, continues, and then, then the order of jihad, go in and fight the Qana'aneen, Come on, man, we're going to fight these giants? Are you kidding? We're sitting over here, you and Allah go and fight them. Allah said, okay. 40 years they have to roam around it's a punishment, but it's also a cleansing period. All those colonial men, those with the colonial men, they got to die off because they're not going to change. You can't change these people. That's their mentality, and Musa alayhi salam can't even. So all these guys die. Musa alayhi salam dies. Harun alayhi salam dies. That whole generation dies. Now we have a generation that were born in that in that exile in the Sinai desert. They were born there, they lived there, rough, tough, manna and salwa, that's it, right? So now when Yusha alayhi salam now takes over, and he comes up, to Quds and fight, they're ready for it. Mm-hmm. They've been nurtured for that. Yeah. They're not colonialized. These are people who grew up in the desert. They have free will, they have free minds, And with them, the victory was, And then ultimately Dawood was a young man, and then he became the king, and so forth and so on. So the Palestinian, the people in Gaza, they're like the people who went through the tea.
It's insane how it mirrors, right?
See?
Yeah.
So all those people who were gulamis to the British and whoever, they were, killed or exiled, and now we have this new generation. They were born in those concentration camps. Gaza was a concentration camp. Past 17 years. So these young guys, they were born in this situation. They were born under occupation. They were born under this thing. They said, okay, so we'll stand up to it. So they were born into that. So they got nothing to lose. It's either we win or we go to Jannah, so it's a win-win, regardless. And so, these Zionists, they're we say in Arabic, warta, this is a dilemma. I mean, what can you do? And they themselves, they admit, the generals, the military heads, you can't beat these guys. Forget it. It's not going to happen. There's no way. You're not going to defeat them. The whole thing, we're going to defeat them. You're not going to win. You've been defeated. They defeated us. I mean, we're not. There's no way you're going to. You can kill all the people in Gaza, but you're not going to defeat these guys.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen, and it's not. You know, so we're seeing, and now what we're seeing is that, you know, before, you know, October 6th, the world, you know, has been duped into thinking that Israel is the civilized liberal democracy in the Middle East among all these monarchs and tyrants, and they're the muhaddab log, you know. And now we see what monsters they are, you know. The whole world is seeing this, you know. The majority now of the polls show us that the majority of the American public, they are pro-Palestinian, anti-Zionist. But we have a bought and sold Congress that's ready to welcome a near convicted war criminal by the International Court, whom the world totally despises, and the world as you know, rightly titled him a war criminal, a genocidal maniac, and the longest and largest and maximum standing ovation for anyone who has appeared in Congress took place for Benjamin Netanyahu. 53 standing ovations. And most interestingly, the biggest ovation was when he attacked the protesters right outside the White House. He said, these, you know, useful idiots funded by Iran who are protesting, you know, let me tell you, man, and they get a standing ovation. In other words, your right for freedom of speech, you have no right because you're talking against Israel. You have no right to do that. And if you do, we're going to chastise you. And so this is the policy, you know. And, you know, the most unfortunate thing at this point in time is that Muslims are, you know, in their colonial mentality, you know, they won't stand up to the occasion. You know, very few Muslims are actually standing up and doing what they need to do in America. And actually, America is, you know, and that's why in America it has to be, you know, maximized. The maximum resistance has to be in America because they are the ones funding the whole thing. It's actually U.S. sponsored. This genocide is USA sponsored. If USA says no more funding, tomorrow it's over. Israel's collapsed. The military has it's been, you know, done in. Their economy is gone. Hundreds of thousands have already left. You know, most of these Israelis are dual citizens. They're just there for the, you know, for the nice Mediterranean, you know, Israeli dream. It used to be the American dream, but we can have a better one in Israel. Well, turning out to be a nightmare. Okay, we leave. You know, the people, all the Galilee of the northern Israel, it's all khali. Hezbollah is throwing the, you know, all this. The southern area, all next to Gaza, that's all khali. So they're in a state of, you know, turmoil. They've got these huge protests going on inside. And so this is a time. Push, come on, keep pushing a little bit more, and you know it's going to be over. But you know, 11 months, you know, it's kya ho gaya? 23 years, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And who? Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Sahaba. It didn't happen in 11 months, folks. It happened after years of continuous struggle, push, sacrifice. You know, so, you know, and I'm very sorry to see that Pakistan is not who, you know, somebody burns a Quran or says something or doesn't say something and they say blasphemy and the whole Punjab, you know, you know, is lit on fire. And a whole community of our Muslim brothers and sisters are being blown to smithereens, and we have nothing. We can't even sacrifice not eating, you know, KFC and stop drinking Coca-Cola, you know. Nahi bhai to kya hoga? You know. So that's unfortunate, but I mean, so we need to push on that, and the youth need to push on this, you know.
So what made you choose Pakistan, by the way? Post Makkah, what made you choose Pakistan?
What made me choose Pakistan? Qadr. That's the jumla. But what mainly was a decided, actually was done by Mashwara, and so my Shaykh also suggested I come to Pakistan. But I basically saw, and I mentioned to him that, look, we have I see three possibilities. One is I stay in Makkah. We stay in Makkah. And I would have pursued graduate studies. So what? But there's really no infrastructure for children. There wasn't really a good environment for, as amazing as that might sound. Makkah, well, go on. But very horrifyingly, it's not a good environment for children's education.
In what sense?
It just isn't. I mean, they do have institutions, but I mean, the nature of them and the mindset of the people involved and what have you, that's a long story. But anyway, it was غير مرضي, if you understand. You know. It was we had a lot of traumatic experiences in that. The other option was to go back to America, and at that point in time, there wasn't really that much happening. You know, what am I going to do there? You know, I'm going to teach Hadith and Qur'an or something. Where's the students? You know, and the other option was to come to Pakistan. And actually, I used to come here previous. You know, I'd been here a few times previously, and I knew the people in Bin Nuri town. They wanted me to come because we had a lot of foreign students at that time, 1970s, even from the 60s, 70s, 80s. We had a lot of students from all over the world. And even South Africa and in America, Europe, even in Arab countries, you know, in the Arab countries, there's no freedom, you know. Very, very oppressive.
Yeah.
You know, you cannot say anything that the government doesn't want you to say, otherwise tomorrow you're ghaib, you know. So that repression that we see, you know, because all those areas, you know, after colonialization, they put those puppets to ensure that you know, they're quagmire down into, you know, all kinds of issues, so they'll never get anywhere, which is what's going on here also. And so then the last option was come to Pakistan, as I mentioned. So the people in Manuri town knew me, and we had all those students, foreign students from 20, 30 different countries, you know. And so I chose to do that. And Pakistan was, and to a large extent still, is the one country, Muslim country, where you can do things. You know, you can start an institution like this, you can go in tabligh, you can, you know, say, you know, what you want to say pretty much, or you used to be able to, or I don't know how it is now. But yeah, and they appreciate people of deen, you know. And so it was, and plus, you know, the children's education, we saw a much better option over here. Of course, people thought I was crazy, you know.
I can imagine.
Number one, you leave America, and then now you can leave Makkah and come to Pakistan. Are you out of your mind? You know?
What year was this when you were leaving Makkah?
1985.
1985.
We came to Pakistan in 1985.
Okay, that was probably the best decade for Madaris anyway. But I think there was a lot of, I think deen was rising, especially from a state level. I think there was more acceptance. But I think 60s and 70s, even Pakistan was fairly liberal. But I think 80s brought in General Zia, and then you're going to have that Islamist movement,
right,
and you have these
right.
Madaris cropping up everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think so it's probably a good time.
Yeah.
And how'd your family take that? How'd you convince your family that I'm moving to Pakistan? You're coming with me, I'm assuming.
No issue. Yeah. Alhamdulillah, my family was pretty much on board, you know. Because, you know, the main issue for any parents are their children, you know. So we saw the best option at the time, you know, to come here. So, yeah, that wasn't... of course, probably we didn't realize what we were getting into.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
But I have to say, it was of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is muqaddar, but I have no regrets. Yeah. Wonderful time, and, you know, so many wonderful experiences, and great learnings, and yeah.
I just want to take you slightly further back. So just before, so I think we're reverse engineering the entire podcast now, but I think that's how it works. So you're in Pakistan. Before that, you're in Makkah. And right before that, I think that it was during, was it during university or post that where you, and how does that sort of journey start? Where you start wondering, and, you know, your entire sort of cycle of where you're looking for the truth. And I remember you sort of, I think the first place you ended up was Morocco, if I'm not wrong. How did that sort of come out? You jumping suddenly from, California, Hollywood,
Well,
suddenly in Morocco.
As I might have explained in the last time, I am, people like me, my generation, I'm a product of the 1960s. The counterculture, hippie, revolutionary culture of the 1960s. That's what, it still defines me, I think, and our generation, we were the generation that stood up and started questioning things. Like Vietnam War. Why are we murdering the Vietnamese? What did they do? And what authority do we have to tell anybody how to live their lives? This whole communist, fear of the commies coming. The McCarthy era, and I don't know if you know that history. And everybody's suspicious. Suspicious to be a communist. Like a communist was like a Satan out of hellfire. It's this paranoia. Anyway, so and then this whole concept of material success is the criteria of real success, which we saw very clearly was a total hoax. Being that we saw the people who had the most material, they were the most stressed out. They were the most psychotic. They were the people filling up, the mental clinics, And being an artist, musician, and being involved in all those movements, and being an artist also, and that's basically what an artist does. An artist is sensitive to what's going on and tries to express that in his form, whether it's music, whether it's painting, whether it's writing or poetry, whatever it might be. And also at that period of time, among the things that came under fire was the standard religions that were the main religions of America, Christianity being the main, and Judaism. And so since I came from both of those backgrounds, my father's side of the family were liberal, secular Ashkenazi Jews who had social contacts in Jewish society, but you didn't see any religion. There was nothing religious about them. My grandfather was the president of the synagogue, but I don't remember seeing him doing anything religious. But I mean, that's how it is.
Yeah.
And then my mother's side of the family, they were Christians, and my great-grandfather was a famous missionary actually in India, and my great-aunt also, and I saw that was a big hoax too. Sunday you go to church and sing some songs, and Jesus has got your back, so you're good to go. So, a lot of my youth, Jewish, Christian, youth in that era, saw that their organized religions that they were supposed to be following were all hoaxes. They were all twisted forms whatever. But it would be a pretty controversial thing to say here, but I'll say it anyway because I know you have a controversial audience. But among the things that was a game changer in the 1960s, later part of 1960s particularly, was that the intoxication of choice previously was alcohol, right? So you had these, like the James Dean, Marlon Brando, get drunk and motorcycle gangs.
Yeah.
Later in the 60s, then marijuana and LSD, psychedelic drugs came. And so what psychedelic drugs did, it gave a kind of a synthetic spiritual experience. Mind-expanding drugs, So alcohol, it makes you stupid.
Yeah.
And these mind-expanding drugs would, take your mind into all these, make you crazy, but in a very novel way, And so it was a kind of a spiritual, synthetic, satanic, if you will, spiritual experience. Everything spiritual doesn't have to be, positive.
Sure.
Like you've got these, these these fakirs or these Hindu, you know, what do you call
even
those
like the
guys?
Buddhists, yeah.
They do all these weird things, you know, and they do it through rohani exercises.
Yeah.
They fast a lot. They do a lot of zuhud. They break their nafs, and they get this spiritual power. But it has nothing to do with Allah, you know. It has nothing to do with Allah's pleasure, you know. So the use of these psychedelic drugs also brought on this kind of awareness that there's a spiritual side. There's, you know, so it kind of opened up. And so on the one hand, the organized religions were seen as nonsense, and on the other hand, we understood that there was something, and it's human nature. There's spirit. There's spiritualness. Human beings have spirit. When you have a spirit, you're alive. When you don't, you're dead. So there's an essence which we don't know anything about. And then, you know, we started getting introduced. We had these gurus coming from India, and Buddhism started, you know, getting among, not mainstream, but, you know, in the counterculture, we started getting into these things. As a musician, I went to Japan. There for 6 months, I was working in Japan. And I used to go to the Buddhist monasteries and meditate. And I got into Buddhism for a while, and I saw a lot of things that were very interesting to me, but got disenchanted after a while. The Beatles, who were the most famous group ever in music history, they had the same thing. I mean, with all that fame and name and all that, you know, but spiritually we're nowhere. And, you know, so they got introduced, and they went to India, went to the ashram and with their bare feet and in the mud hut, you know, saying, wow, this is great, you know. So when their guru came to America, so I was there at the LA airport with other, you know, weirdos of my genre, you know, and we were there to greet our new sheikh, you know.
Yeah.
And we thought that was very novel, and, you know, we get into this transcendental meditation and, you know, just clear your mind and your heart from everything, and you just kind of float around in energy and things like that. But end of the day, you know, there's not really any real substance to it all. We've got big issues in the world. We've got financial, we got politically, we got all kinds of things. We need guidance here, you know. And go and, you know, go float around in energy space on the mountaintop. Okay, you know.
I think that's
what
still,
else have you got?
Yeah, that's still like escapism to some degree.
Yeah. Like Bob Dylan says, okay, you know, now what else can you show me? You know.
Sheikh, I want to cut in. Yeah.
So that's why ultimately I whatever was available around, you know, like it wasn't, you know, I would get disenchanted. I would say, well, no, that's not the whole story. Where's the original? So I started really having this firm faith that there's a God, there's a power in the universe, and ultimate success is getting connected to him, you know. And where's the real system? Where's the original one? I thought it must be somewhere. So I came to this conclusion, long story, that it's in Ethiopia. So then I took off to Ethiopia.
So obviously not a direct one, but at least in your understanding of it, that your art form was still somehow clean from a lot of this mess.
Let me tell you something. This is something people don't know generally, but our generation, or people like me, and even of my generation, there was a group, they were called the Last Poets, which I don't think you ever heard of. Okay. Even in America, a lot of people never heard of them. They were Muslims.
Acha.
These were the precursors of rap.
Oh, wow.
But it was a totally different thing in the sense that what these guys were, they were poets, last poets. And what they would take their poetry, and they didn't have this hip hop, they had this really avant-garde jazz music.
Okay.
These
That was
are
the jazz music.
African American Muslims.
Yeah. They're all African Americans. I think one or two are still alive, maybe. And so they had, you know, some of the first musicians, the first Muslims in America were jazz musicians. Now, I don't know if you know anything about that, but jazz music is something, it's a very unique genre, you know. It's classical, you know, expertise and all that. It's very technical, but it's based in improvisation. Obviously, you take a theme. And that's why the Indian classical music was very interesting to us. Because it was all about you'd have a theme, and then you'd improvise on it, and the scales that they would use were unique. And one of the great innovators in jazz was John Coltrane. Probably one of the most influential persons in modern jazz was John Coltrane, who had a sitar in his house, you know, and he was very influenced by the scales, the Indian scales, which are unique,
Yeah.
So these guys, they had this, this revolutionary Afro-American nationalism and, social justice, rap going on, poetry, behind this modern jazz, avant-garde jazz background. And it was very, what we call underground music, like we had underground cinema, we had underground music and poetry and literature, and most of the people were oblivious to it. But, people like us were into that kind of stuff. But these were the first, that was the first expression of that type. And to this day, most of these rappers are Muslims.
Yeah.
Like, what's his name, the comedian?
Oh yeah, big guy. How can I forget his name? I know
Chappelle.
Chappelle.
Dave
Dave
Chappelle.
Chappelle. Yeah,
Chappelle.
he's Muslim. Yeah. I was shocked when I found out he was Muslim. Yeah,
I mean, you would never know that he's a Muslim from the content that he talks about.
but he's Muslim. Yeah.
But so someone was interviewing. I saw that interview. They said, "You accept?" He said, "You're a Muslim." We heard it. Yeah. He said, "Yeah, but I'm not very good at it."
Yeah.
I mean, he's honest, But and some of these rappers, they're actually Muslims. They say, "Yeah, we're Muslims." Well, you're talking. Yeah, man, we know we're sinners. Astaghfirullah. But that's all we know. That's all we know how to do.
Tupac is Tupac Shakur, so he's coming from Muslim lineage as well. I think probably.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this. So in Afro-American community, you won't find an Afro-American family except somebody's a Muslim in their family. So I mean, Islam is something that's part of their their society. It's been there for forever.
And I think that's like stemming from, I think, Elijah Muhammad and then Malcolm X, and I think that's when.
Yeah, around 30s and 40s, people started coming. There was Dawah, and before that, actually, from the 11th century, Muslims actually had come to America. It's a long history, but recent history, and of course, a lot of the Afro-Americans, you can't say all of them, but at least a good amount of them, if not perhaps even a majority of them, were Muslims. And we even have documented revolts of Muslims, who, particularly in the Caribbean, there was a wonderful history about that. And even some of them were scholars, and they wrote, and there's been documentaries about them since. So Islam has always been something the Afro-Americans identified with. They never had a problem with that, and they identified with it. And so the earliest Muslims were, even when I became a Muslim, it was all Afro-Americans. People who weren't Afro-American, you count them on the fingers of one hand. And the people who were like white or, weren't Afro-Americans who accepted Islam, they would also be people connected to the black community, like myself in music, and civil rights and movement and stuff like that. But otherwise, nobody else was accepting Islam. Now, the Hispanic community, they're the ones that are, they're in the front lines. Out of 10 people in California when I was there, in Southern California, we had a good program in Southern California, a very good program down there. And we had a very good program for the new Muslims. 9 out of 10 of the new Muslims now, Hispanic, Spanish-speaking, Mexico, Colombia, South America, whatever. And 9 out of those 10 will be women.
Subhanallah.
Yeah. Which seems to be strange, but it's not.
This is actually a phenomenon, like, for example, especially after Gaza, like there's been a huge sort of, at least you would say on social media, a huge movement of people exploring the Quran, exploring Islam. There are people looking for answers. And the majority of these people
it's the response to feminism.
Yeah. And it's most of them have been women, like from at least like what you can tell.
Exactly.
It's quite popular, especially among Western women. Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, this whole feminist movement is not for feminism. It's defeminizing women. And women will, if they have any fitrat, they start really, wait, you're turning us into monsters, What are you doing to us? We were respected and honored and loved and protected and cared for, and now you made us into garbage women and police women, and you're turning us into, you're stripping us of our femininity. And they so when they see Muslims and they're modest, they're chaste, they're respected, they're loved, they're protected, they're looked after, they say, wow, what are we missing? Whoa, So many women, this is the thing that attracts them. And otherwise, you just have, if a man wears what women wear in America, you'll be considered indecent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My grandmother used to wear, floor length dresses. My grandmother. That's how
It was.
short-lived this whole thing is.
Yeah.
And then when the first revolutionary women would raise their dress to above the ankle, that was like, whoa,
Yeah.
what's this? It was like, But then there's no actual criteria.
Yeah.
There's no dress code. It's just like that was the norm.
There's no moral anchor. Yeah.
There's no moral guideline specific.
Yeah.
So ultimately, they get desensitized and okay, chalo, jobio, right? So then another woman says, okay, I'm going up to the calf. I'm going to the knee. Oh, qiyamah. And then after some period, and then now it's what's left? Nothing. Now, if a man wears at the beach what these women are wearing, I mean, it's even worse, you could say, than having nothing, because there's nothing there. Everything is totally. If a man wore something like that, he would be like, "Hey, what's wrong with you, man?" But look at what they've done. So these women, you're just a sex object.
Yeah.
You have to be sexy. You have to be attractive. You have to lure people with your body, and you have to be conscious of every curve and every, And can you imagine how we as men? I mean, alhamdulillah, but can you imagine being in that situation? How stressful that is. Everybody's watching you. You have to you're on display on everyone, and everybody's checking you out, and
And there's even like psychological impact of that.
Yeah,
The modern research is showing like just body image issues that are so much more prevalent in younger
now it's
women.
become a whole psychological, topic and area, and all you do is have to cover up.
I think
It's over with then.
I was
Nobody
watching
sees
this,
you. You have 2 extra pounds, or you have a little wrinkle here or whatever.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. You're fine. Just relax.
I think I saw like an ad from Dove. They tried to do this like corporate social responsibility thing, like whatever they're doing besides that. But the content actually within it was, I think, your girls as young as 10 years old became very obsessed with their skincare routines. Right? Like,
absolutely.
I need to have a bedtime routine. I need to have a morning routine. Like, these things are not normal for kids that age, right?
Not normal for anybody.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, it's become more normalized, I think, through the teenagers, right? Like, I speak to my wife about this as well. Like, when she was in school, for example, like doing makeup was like a big no-no. Like, they would only talk about it, but they wouldn't actually be doing it. And she's like, I look at like younger girls now who are like probably 13, 14, 15 years old, and they're fully made up, right? For us, that was unexpected, unimaginable. Like, you wouldn't even have access to that sort of makeup that these children are now getting. So it's sort of like, it's coming closer and closer in that sense, I think, here as well.
It's heartbreaking that, when you were speaking about the dress thing, it's insane how quickly that's happening in Pakistan as well, especially in universities that are fairly secular. And I always think that we're sort of like West minus 30. So the West gets there, and then we just, that imperialism.
But the thing is
season,
that, again, that goes back to the Gulami mentality. West is right.
Yeah.
West is great. And the whole concept, white.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but there was a statistics that showed that the whitening cream, the men are the bigger consumers than the women.
That's insane. Acha.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's crazy. And so where did you get this thing that white is, like, for example, I lived here for so many years, so I know the whole thing. When they look for the girl,
Yeah.
रंग साफ होना चाहिए. क्या मतलब?
Yeah.
यानी सफेद.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with things? Safai, So this is, where did you get that from? I mean, what makes that skin color? And actually, to me, people who are really white, they're not as beautiful as more color, more dark, rich color, But I mean, all those colors, they're all beautiful. They're all its creation. If you go into a garden, it's all roses. Okay, roses are beautiful, red, mashallah. All roses, you get tired of it. You got roses, you got some yellow daffodils, you got some turquoise orchids, you got so all these different colors, and they make the garden beautiful. So that's how we're supposed to see things, And every color is beautiful, And so where did we get this idea? Because of our masters, our colonialist masters were white, so white is bright, and that's what's happening. It's crazy,
Sheikh, just on that, because I think we've touched upon just our colonial history and sort of the hangover.
I always had a big issue with this. Sorry to cut you off. But I always had a big issue with this from childhood. I couldn't figure this out. What in the world is wrong with these people? I mean, somebody has they have more pigment in their skin, and all of a sudden this makes you, better or less. It's insane.
Yeah, so my question was like, we've spoken about the Pakistani sort of mentality around the colonial hangover.
It's a
essentially.
subcontinent all over the
Yeah.
It's not only in the subcontinent, it's all over the world, actually.
You also mentioned, so when you were comparing Palestinians and Pakistanis, you mentioned like your impression at least, and I don't know about you, but for me being a Pakistani, I don't see us as a resilient nation, or at least right now, the state that we're in. I feel like we're very defeatist in our attitude, especially at the current sort of socio-economic or political landscape that we're in. What makes you kind of have that perception of us?
So when I say resilience, I don't mean resilience for a higher cause.
Okay.
Just
to live.
He means deed.
Huh?
Just deed.
Ziddi. Like very sort of...
Ziddi, and I'll tell you what, belligerence.
Yeah.
I've never seen more belligerent people. Sorry, folks.
No, that's
No, that's fair.
You don't take no for an answer.
That's easier for me to accept
Yeah.
the resilience that we were comparing the Palestinians with, because I was like, we're not that. Like, we don't even have that mentality.
But
right
look,
now.
just go out in the street.
Yeah.
Look at these people, how they're living.
Subhanallah.
This guy lives in the middle of this congested, filthy market, and he's got a place about 2 foot by 2 foot. He lives his whole life there. Every day he's got the resilience to go in. I couldn't do that for a day.
Yeah.
This guy's roaming around the street picking up garbage and old used nails, and selling them in the market. And subhanAllah. And if you ask the guy, Bhai kya haal hai? Allah ka bar shukr hai, but Allah ka bar mahmani. Now go to defense and Goldberg, Saab kya haal hai? Kya hai, main kya bata sakta hu? Masale masail, itna wo hai. Shikayat.
Yeah.
This guy's got nothing, and he's I've seen this a lot.
In Pakistan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And the poor, this is not only in Pakistan. You go down because, as a musician, so I was in jazz and R&B and all that. So my musical career, professional career was all with black people. And so a lot of my time was spent in the areas, in the neighborhood, in the ghetto. As a matter of fact, what happened was, I loved the Afro-American music from my childhood because we were all musicians, and my father was a jazz musician. And he had these records. I never saw a black person when I was a kid. But we had these records of Ray Charles and all these people, and I loved that music. So from childhood, I was playing this kind of music. When I came to California, and I would play with these black musicians. They said, "Hey, you're about the only white guy we've seen that can play our music, but what you need is to get the culture." I said, "Oh, yeah." At the time, I'm living in Beverly Hills, Beverly Hills and Santa Monica Boulevard. And so this guy tells me, this piano player, he says, "But you need to get the culture." I said, "Yeah, good idea." So purposely, I went down and stayed in the ghetto to get the culture,
Subhanallah.
to feel what they're feeling of. What are these people facing that gave them that kind of art form, They have an expression, you got to pay your dues to pay the blues. And what do they mean by that? Blues meaning, depressed. And it's, they're talking about all their, life struggles and all that. So when you go down, then you see what the life is like down there. It's another world.
Sheikh, subhanallah, like every time I think you speak about your sort of past experience being a musician as well, I can already see with like the way you kind of talk about it. It was something that you were very deeply invested into, like emotionally.
It was my life.
Yeah.
I was living for that.
And sort of, so obviously coming into Islam, and accepting this new religion, and then obviously with it over time, or whether it was abrupt, I don't know, you can kind of share that with us. What was that experience like of giving something up that was so dear to you? And especially, I think I'm asking this from the perspective of the younger generation, a lot of whom are either addicted to listening to it, or are in actually the process
Engaged,
of making
yeah.
music, right? Yeah. How does that sort of look like? What was the journey like there?
Well, like I said, the early Muslims, I wasn't the only one. There was, many great jazz musicians who accepted Islam. And in fact, very interestingly, the Tabligh movement, the early Tablighi movement, it was all Afro-Americans.
In America.
Yeah.
Subhanallah.
And the first shura of the United States were 5 people. Somehow I was one of them. So, my other 2 colleagues were also former jazz musicians. The Emir of America was a former jazz musician.
Subhanallah.
He used to play with Charlie Parker. He was like the icon of a form called bebop. It was, anyway. And so 3 of us were former jazz musicians, and then there was 2 Indian engineers that was the first shura of Tabligh. So, and these guys were like top of the line. They were like, an upcoming young, top of the line, and finish, khalas, So my own experience was, and part of, if not perhaps even the most important, motivation of spiritual development was how that would affect my music. Because, the spiritual experience, and then express that through my music, and because that's what we do, Now, after I became a Muslim, in fact, after I became a Muslim, and I was in Ethiopia, then I went to Yemen, and then from Yemen I went on the boat to Hajj with my guitar.
Subhanallah.
In Ihram with guitar. Like, hey, I'm this Islamic music now. All that other stuff, okay, all the intoxicants and all that, that's okay, we've done away with that. But, now we've got a whole new genre, and and even ulama I met, I said, listen, no, you're going to listen. Listen to this,
Yeah.
This is real stuff, And so that was, but the interesting thing was that, if you're a professional musician, it's like any profession, and particularly you have to be on your game, It's like 6-8 hours a day, you have to be on it, or you're going to lose your skill sets, And, you have to keep, honing, and you have to, keep advancing. And I started losing interest, which was quite shocking, And when I got back, and then, long story, and I got sick, and I never wanted to come back to America. When I left America in 1970, I said, I'm never coming back to this country. But I ended up 71, 72. I was back because of an injury, and I needed a surgery. So as soon as I get back to America, my buddies heard that, I'm back. Hey, come on, we got a gig here, we got this. I said, oh, man. Nightclubs and all that doesn't, that's not going to work. But I did jam, with my old buddies. And, it was interesting. I thought, I was kind of like a ringleader kind of a guy, and I would, be kind of a pivotal person in any band that I played in, and people kind of pivot around me. So I thought, okay, they used to listen to me and follow me, and, so now as a Muslim, they're all going to become Muslims. And, but that didn't happen. So that was kind of shocking too. So, I remember I got back to LA, and we had a jam session with all my, a lot of my, and then, this guy with a turban and this long and looked kind of, then I started telling him what I was into, and know this and know that, and, whoa, that's too intense for us, and so هذا فراق بيني وبينكم, so I realized that that crowd and that whole thing is now no longer, that's a closed chapter now. But I still consider myself a musician, and that's my main object of life. But I was losing interest, which was upsetting, obviously, And then ultimately, and then actually I wanted that my program was when I came back to America, I just wanted to study Arabic and then, get healthier and then go back. So what I did was I just enrolled in an Arabic, class in downtown LA, and I just immersed myself in that. Like I was in music, So Arabic language,
Okay,
kind of
yeah.
in Islamic studies, it just took. And so my father, the one thing, I mean, in America, the liberals are supposed to the actual original liberals were actually liberal. I mean, okay, whatever you want to do, fine, just don't push it on us, right? But my father, he was only really angry with me on one point. He said, why did you leave music? Why did you leave your career? They thought I was going to be the one that was going to really do it, and so I said, look, Dad, I didn't leave music. I just went to a higher form. Really? So I immersed myself in the Arabic language, and I just lost interest, I hardly ever picked up an instrument anymore. But I didn't have the concept that this is wrong and, I shouldn't be engaged in it. But I just lost interest, and I just got involved in the Arabic language and Islamic studies. And then when I left to go back to Arabia, I sold all my guitars and all my instruments, and khalas, that was the end. Yeah. So it was just like kind of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just turned my heart. I mean, and just lost interest, and then ultimately I realized. And as a musician, we know that we are dealing in kind of a supernatural thing, It controls mind and heart, and it's very dangerous stuff, I mean, it could be, it
And
can.
especially this modern digital music, like
Huh?
modern age digital music. Like a lot of these DJs, what they do and play with the heartbeats when people are in nightclubs and stuff. Like I've seen documentaries on it.
Yeah, and I mean,
experienced
even
it as
in
well.
our
It's
era,
very-
back in the 60s even, there was satanic things going on in the recording studios and what we know about all that, And, they anyway, a long story, but so that's what happened to me. And most of us who were former musicians and we got involved in deen, we just lost interest, and this is it's just not what we want to be engaged.
Subhanallah.
And then then we come to find out the Shari Haythiyat and all that.
Yeah.
And we go, okay, khalas, But there's other perspectives. My dear friend Cat Stephen Yusuf Islam, who we spent 40 days together in Jamaat.
Mashallah.
And so he before I went to Saudi Arabia, he came and stayed with me in New York, in Buffalo, where I was living at the time. So he asked me, so, okay, Hashim, what do you say? Is this music haram or what? So now he's, top of his career, and he's, and so I just said, look, Yusuf, just keep on doing what you're doing. You'll figure it out. I'll show you what you need to know. And I left it at that. Then I went to Saudi Arabia. I didn't see him for years. In the meantime, he left, he also left music. And we were cut off for decades. And then I happened to be in England a long time after that. And then, so he had opened up this hotel in London. And so, I was in Leicester, so I came down to London and reminiscing about old times and whatnot. And then, and then he told me how he actually left music. He said, he used to come to the States from time to time. So he was visiting a masjid in America. And one of these Afro-American brothers, he was introduced to one of these Afro-American brothers, and they said, this is, Yusuf Islam, he was Cat Stephen. Musician, man, that's haram, man. You can't. So Yusuf, he said, the guy, it just hit me like, oh, wow. So I got to leave this. Subhanallah. And so he stopped. Of course, later on, then he got re-involved, and that's another long story. And but he's an amazing person, unique. I don't think I've met anybody like that. Just a genuine, unique person. Even though I don't agree with what he's doing now, but he has his own perspective on that. But I haven't seen him in a long time, actually, since he really got back into that. But so some don't, they don't leave it, but a lot of us did. But those who got into Dini studies deeply in the Arabic language, it becomes low class. It's down here, way down there now. And Arabic language, Qur'an and Hadith and Subhanallah. I mean, this is, You know, I would say Quran is the symphony of the sky, you know. So, you know.
Subhanallah.
So that was my kind of journey on that.
Sheikh, Jazakallah khair for your time. I honestly, I thought we could keep going, but we have to get you to the talk as well. And we have lassi for you waiting.
Oh.
Yeah, so just before that. So once again, I wish we can do this again. I don't know if you'll get the time or we'll be able to find you. But it was just lovely speaking to you. And I hope that whatever that was said today can benefit everyone who was listening. Jazakallah Hamis. And so Jazakallah khair, Sheikh.